When Gladiator 2 hit theaters last year and pulled in a solid box office, the first thing people started asking Ridley Scott in interviews was pretty obvious. Everyone wanted to know if he planned to keep this thing going as a full-on franchise, and Scott didn't dance around it. He was straight up saying he does want to make Gladiator 3, and he even mentioned that there are already a few story drafts on the table. Different plot lines, different directions the third movie could take. The wild part is that Scott is already 88, and even at that age, he said he would love to direct the third film himself, but there's a real chance Paramount might move forward with someone else behind the camera while still keeping Scott's blessing. Honestly, there are plenty of directors who could take on a historical epic like this, something grounded in the real Roman Empire, but still stylized enough for the big screen. If you look at where the second movie ends, the third one could easily pick up that momentum and continue the sequel's main thread without breaking anything. Just like the first two films, the story is pulled from pieces of real history and then reimagined with dramatic elements for cinematic effect. And if you know your Roman history, you can probably guess where this is going. There's a real chance the third movie shows Denzel Washington's character, Macrinus, rising to become the next emperor. Gladiator 2 mixes real figures and fictionalized events from Rome's past to follow Lucius, who's written in the films as the son of Lucilla and Maximus, even though historically he's more of a mashup of a couple different people. His journey is all about climbing from tragedy to power, and if Gladiator 3 happens, it could show that this fictional Lucius has stepped into an empire standing right on the edge of some serious upheaval. By the end of Gladiator 2, both Roman emperors, Caracalla and Geta, are gone. Geta falls thanks to the schemes of the calculating Macrinus, and Caracalla dies by Macrinus' own hand. For a short moment, Macrinus steps into power, only to be taken out by Lucius, leaving the son of Lucilla and Maximus holding control of the empire. In real history, Macrinus does become emperor after Caracalla's death, though he wasn't the one who did the killing himself. His reign lasts a little over a year before he's overthrown, not by Lucius, but by Elagabalus. The real Caracalla was known for being brutal and unpredictable. In AD 211, he straight up had his brother and co-emperor Geta murdered so he could rule alone. A few years later, he kicked off a short war with the Parthian Empire, only to be assassinated by one of his own soldiers. Macrinus, who may have been involved, took his place. As emperor, Macrinus tried to calm everything down. He pushed to end Rome's active wars and introduced financial reforms to stabilize the economy. But Caracalla's female relatives were plotting against him. First was his mother, Julia Domna, who Macrinus had imprisoned. Even more dangerous was his aunt, Julia Maesa. She's the one who spread the idea that Elagabalus was Caracalla's illegitimate son, positioning him as the next emperor. Her plan paid off at the Battle of Antioch, where Elagabalus's forces clashed with Macrinus' army. Macrinus lost, fled, and was eventually captured and executed. Elagabalus, also known as Heliogabalus, took the throne. Elagabalus ruled longer, but his ending wasn't much different. When it became clear that his support was crumbling, Julia Maesa stepped in again and backed a new candidate. Elagabalus was assassinated and replaced by Severus Alexander, who also ended up being assassinated. His death kicked off the crisis of the 3rd century, almost 50 years of non-stop chaos involving civil wars, invasions, and economic collapse. The deaths of Caracalla and then Macrinus pushed Rome into a downward spiral. Emperors were rising and falling constantly. Factions were tearing the state apart, provincial governors and generals were grabbing power whenever they could, and foreign enemies took advantage of every crack in the empire. If Gladiator 3 keeps following the fictional Lucius while still loosely sticking to real Roman history, then he'd likely slide right into the spot Elagabalus held and end up dealing with the same problems that dragged the empire toward the crisis of the 3rd century. Just like Elagabalus, Lucius is the one who kills Macrinus and takes the throne afterward, with Lucilla pulling the strings the same way Julia Maesa did in real life. And if that's the path the movie takes, then Lucius might be heading straight toward a similar fate. He'd quickly learn that ruling Rome in the 3rd century wasn't glorious or victorious. It was messy, unstable, and way darker than anyone would expect. even if he managed to secure the throne and create some early stability, he wouldn't escape the massive forces that were already pushing the Roman Empire toward collapse. The fight to hold on to power would hit him instantly. Rebellions, political rivals, an economy stretched thin, and endless military pressure were exactly what crushed the emperors of the Severan dynasty, and they'd be sitting on Lucius's doorstep the moment he put on the purple. Rome's constant wars would be his biggest and most immediate headache. Emperors weren't just figureheads, they had to protect the borders and keep the peace at home. At this point in history, Germanic tribes were pushing hard along the Rhine and Danube, and in the east, the rise of what would become the Sasanian Empire was turning into a major threat. On top of all that, he'd inherit the Parthian conflict Caracalla had reignited. Does he push for peace like the real Macrinus tried, or keep fighting and drain Rome's finances even further? Either choice could spark a plot to overthrow him. Lucius's rise would only be the beginning of a much more complicated and dangerous story, shaped by the same forces that eventually dragged Rome into one of its most chaotic eras. Gladiator 2 ends with Lucius looking like a victorious, unifying leader, but history makes it pretty clear that if he were real, his reign would be anything but simple. Gladiator 3 could finally dive into a side of Roman politics the first two movies barely touched. This is where the real intrigue kicks in, with senators pulling strings, provinces pushing back, the army choosing its own favorites, hidden deals, betrayal, and assassination attempts bubbling under the surface. The second film was built on revenge and freedom. The third could shift the energy toward power itself and the cost that comes with it. The scale could also jump to a whole new level. In the second movie, Rome looked restored and glowing with celebrations. In the third, it could already feel like an empire fading at the edges. Border conflicts flaring up, taxes crushing the people, angry legions demanding more, entire provinces dreaming about independence. All these cracks could create the massive backdrop that turns the story into something far bigger than what came before. Paramount would probably want a serious new antagonist too. Maybe a general who the legions trust more than the emperor. Maybe a provincial ruler who's had enough of bowing to Rome. Maybe a spiritual figure who sees Lucius as a threat to everything he stands for. Macrinus drove the conflict in the second movie, but the third one could bring in someone who matches Lucius in presence and danger. Another great direction would be exploring how the legend of Maximus starts to twist over time and turn into mythology. Lucius might try to live up to that legacy, only to realize that the higher he climbs, the clearer it becomes that he can't repeat his father's path. If Paramount decides to wrap up Lucius's arc and just tell a completely new story, a time jump forward works perfectly. Late 3rd century is the ideal setting. By this point, Rome is basically falling apart. The empire is fractured, with the Gallic and Palmyrene empires breaking off, barbarians pressing in, the economy collapsing, and the capital losing influence. Every year could see Rome survive or collapse completely, which makes for the perfect high-stakes backdrop for Gladiator 3. In this setup, the main character could be Aurelian. He was a real emperor, but in the film he could be totally reimagined, completely separate from Maximus or Lucius. He's a soldier who rose through the ranks, not a noble. His story is brutal, bloody, and perfect for adaptation. He comes to power when Rome is almost dead. Barbarians at the northern borders, provinces rebelling, legions ignoring authority, the economy in ruins, roads destroyed. Nothing left of Rome's former glory. Aurelian is tough, smart, flawed, and charismatic. Someone who can try to pull it all back together, and his tragic end would hit hard, leaving no one in the audience untouched.